Good morning, everybody. I can't tell you how delighted I am to be here at this wonderful convention in Kansas City, and it's been just so impressive so far, with all these wonderful speakers and their vocation stories, and as usual, it's so incredibly inspiring, and this is really what Serra is all about as we all go about what we do in Serra. So it's not a task, but what I have to do today is to talk very briefly, really, about the state of Serra, which is kind of difficult to confine into the amount of time we have. So I'll be picking out some major points that I see that have been important in Serra International over this year, well, 10 months in my case. I keep reminding them of that because the convention was in August last year. So it's been a very, very fast 10 months, as you can imagine, a very fast year, if you like, in general. One thing I would really like to do at the very, very beginning is for us to say a Hail Mary and take a minute's silence for Bob Campney, who was our treasurer, as you know, on the SI board, and who died very unexpectedly this year. So in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. And just a minute in silence to pray for Bob and for all Serrans who have died. So thank you. Bob put a tremendous amount of effort into his work for Serra, as most of you know, and for us to give him a minute is the least we can do, but we know that he is in our prayers. So what's been new in our Serra board? Well, I think one of the very important things was the move of the office from where it has been to its new location. And I know John and staff are very, very willing to have anyone who wants to visit, maybe just let them know a little bit in advance. Now, we had a meeting of what I call the Serra Trinity. So the three entities, Serra International, the Foundation, the USA Council. So Judy Shoemaker was at that point the president of the foundation. So she, Anne Roach, and I met. We had a meeting in Chicago, organized at the office, and it was a very useful way for us to exchange ideas and to discuss some areas of perhaps a little misunderstandings at times, maybe some areas that were maybe a little unclear. And of course, clarification is essential for moving forward, along with a dose of humility, patience, and charity, of course. But we do know that a current buzzword is listening, and we've heard that so often during these particular talks here. And so I think our speakers have in fact emphasized that. And last year at the convention, in my original speech, I talked about listening and my hope that everyone in Serra would have a voice. So listening is a first step towards clarification, and getting the facts right is so important for discerning on the basis of reality what we will be doing going forward. Because we all have the same vision for Serra, even if the mission of each of the entities is slightly different in purpose. Cindy became the next president of the Serra Foundation, and Anne and Cindy and I met briefly in Chicago after the meeting about meetings, which I'll get to. And again, I appreciated the time we had to discuss some matters that arise as we do. So I benefited from their perspectives and learned more about some matters. And so we are a three-board organization, and I think we have to listen to one another more, because that is not always easy. The meeting about meetings was a really important meeting held in Chicago, not to say that the previous meeting I was not, have to be diplomatic here. So but this one was held in Chicago in April, It was dubbed a meeting about meetings because it was necessary to discuss the situation about conventions, the matters of location, frequency, expenses, challenges. There had been some discussion for a few years about the rally and the SI convention, that they were too similar with speakers, panels, banquets, and so on. And besides that aspect, the main point needing to be addressed was that the numbers attending each event have been falling, and we couldn't continue to blame that on the COVID years. We were asking questions such, are we expecting too much of Serrans? Are we expecting them to attend too many events? Are 2 major meetings each year too many? Do these events have to be in top-flight hotels? What about travel expenses with ever-increasing rates? Air travel is increasingly expensive, and so on. I had certainly been thinking we should change our approach and suggested this meeting to ask the questions and to listen to each other. And I asked some former SI presidents for their input too. But it turned out that the US Council had proactively made moves to change the type of location and format of their future rallies, and that was a very important decision. The difference between it and the SI convention will be more marked, although every bit as important for the US. But rallies will focus more on leadership, training workshops, and so on, which we all need, while perhaps housed in, for example, retreat houses or more low-key facilities. The Serra International Convention will concentrate more on its international features and work in venues in other countries, of course, perhaps though holding it outside the US every 2 years instead of every other year. Thought was given to hosting future conventions in more central venues in the United States, helping to attract more members who could drive instead of flying, for example, while at the same time, many of the clubs in these areas have a goodly number of Serrans, very impressive, in fact, compared with some other areas. The convention committee under Tim O'Neill was, of course, well represented there and explained their mode of operation and their thoughts to the meeting. Clarification was necessary on many points, but I believe everyone was hopeful after the meeting that Serra International and the US Council had turned a corner, and that we would be able to compare notes about the outcomes of these changes in a few years. And so again, the cooperation of everyone and the opportunity to express viewpoints and to meet personally were important factors. Another matter I'd like to raise is the development of the strategic plan. Kurt had said last year that after all the work the SI board had done on it, it shouldn't be left in a drawer and forgotten, but that we should get to work on it. And as I said last year, Serra has a mission and a vision, and they're both based on Catholic principles and values, which are needed for the vision that helps us develop the mission. So there have been really good responses from some countries like Mexico, Hong Kong, Italy, and the United States, and forgive me if I've omitted anyone, but some countries still have to have some time to respond. But only a year has passed since then, 10 months, and things take time. So I'm hoping that the strategic plan will continue to be developed. Now I'm talking about Serra International, under the guidance of the Long Range Planning Committee, which will follow up with our national councils in these matters, with hopes of learning about Serra's ongoing development as it tries to achieve its goals globally, namely making Serra better known in the world, strengthening our clubs, and developing our own spirituality, to mention just some. The last part is really important, which I think is one of the benefits we really achieve from attending conventions and rallies. And as Bishop Johnson said in his homily on Thursday evening at that wonderful liturgy, what's the point of striving to increase vocations to the priesthood and consecrated life in other people's lives if we're not working to develop our own spiritual lives? Every vocation is important in building the kingdom. And you know the phrase, you can't give what you don't have. In this particular section, before I actually move to some slides, because I do have some, that's not just window dressing. On Monday meetings, we've had every Monday morning, the president, past president, president-elect, and more recently, the president-elect-elect have been meeting for an hour with John Liston, pretty religiously, and I use that in both senses of the word. And it has proved really useful in keeping up with ideas, suggestions, questions, etc., as well as preparing for meetings, just to keep up with what's going on globally in Serra. So our vice presidents will be making brief reports on their activities later, but uppermost in everyone's mind is the new Serra Club of Cologne in Germany. And I want to thank Margot Getty and Kurt Medico, and I think Pat Mansell too, for your perseverance in working towards that, an incredible amount of work and visiting. And we wish the new president there in Cologne and her team every success as we welcome them into the Serra family. So many other clubs have been chartered this year, and many were congratulated. I think especially, and I know I'm singling clubs out, but some clubs just have an amazing record, because I think there's something about Nashville and Williamson County Air in terms of the new clubs being founded, not only new clubs, but with a really large number of Serrans in them. They really are to be congratulated for all their work. Serra Connects is another important element in the global international aspect of Serra. It's going from strength to strength thanks to the talented committee organising it. And I have actually enjoyed contributing to it myself, but more really enjoying other people's contributions. Vocations and programmes are being nicely developed, and Moira McQueen and Tony Mangione, the vice presidents, have worked hard all year collecting information and providing food for thought for Serran activities and structure. No, it's the 83rd. John, which is it? It's the 90th anniversary. Just forget you saw that particular figure. But it is the 90th anniversary, so that's something else. And we know we're in Kansas City, Missouri, and very grateful to be here. Okay, I couldn't resist starting with this one, because it was just showing the energy last year moving forward. And at the time afterwards, I thought, isn't it terrific to be able to count on past presidents for advice, just the experiences they've had over the year, and the enthusiastic way in which they support the incoming president. And I'm looking forward to joining that particular club very soon. One of the first places we visited we went to Scotland, actually, because not just because Matt and I are Scottish, but it was helpful. But because the Great Britain, the Serra Club of Great Britain, it's called, was having its annual general meeting. They were actually doing it by Zoom this year, but I was really, delighted to be present there and to talk with. Oh, go back. No, I don't have a slide for it. I forgot to take photographs in Scotland, and so we were able to take part in their board meeting and to have a question and answer session there. And of course, we have the same types of questions, I think, no matter where we actually live in Serra. And then we went to the meeting of the Italian National Council, which was being held in Arezzo in Tuscany. And so they welcomed us really, really warmly. Tony Mangione and Anna were also there. And so they had a club meeting the very first night we were there, and I was able to be involved in that very pleasant task of inducting new members. I think they had 4 that night, and it was an absolute delight. And then they had their actual council meeting the next morning, and the president, Giuliano Ferrari, was very, very helpful. I speak a little Italian, but not very much. And he was really helpful, though, in helping me through the meeting. We did a Google Translate, etc., just so that I would be relatively up to date, especially at the question and answer session, because there were many. And this is a picture of the four of us I mentioned in Arezzo at their Italian National Council. I took along, as the president has to do, the relic of St. Junipero Serra, which causes amazing discussions in airports, Emanuela, so be prepared. It's what? It's a what? Yeah. It's a real opportunity, you might say, for evangelization, and especially to explain to customs officers, what is Serra. So Giuliano and his wife there are holding the icon. One of the wonderful parts I thought of this particular convention was that they tied in the spirituality aspect very closely. And I don't know if they deliberately held it in Arezzo. I suspect they did, because it's very close to La Verna, the monastery where St. Francis of Assisi spent a lot of time, and where in fact he received the stigmata. So after the meeting on the Saturday afternoon, we drove to the monastery, beautiful, and of course it was the 800th anniversary of his receiving the stigmata last year. So it's important anyway, but it was a really special occasion, and we were really privileged to be part of that. And this is just when I'm touching the part where he's said to have actually received the stigmata. And this part here is the underground cave. Anybody who's read about St. Francis of Assisi knows that he was ascetic, and so his prayer life was very much spent on the cold ground. And this was the underground cave there, where he slept sometimes on the rock and where he went to pray. So that was very inspiring. Not really challenged to follow it, but really just what an amazing saint. I mean, just incredible. And Giuliano sent me this picture afterwards of the view in the evening from the mountain in which the monastery sits. And it was just it's so stark with that very bare crucifix. And we had said the Serra prayer around that, and it was extremely moving. We had in the monastery refectory, they had supper, which was really interesting because all the monks served all the food, made all the food, did everything for us, and were just delightful to talk with. Many of them spoke a lot of language, including English and Scottish, and so we were really privileged again to be there. This was in the closing mass at the cathedral in Arezzo with the Archbishop in the back. I really should have him further forward. I just don't have a photograph that did that. He made the Serra group very, very welcome, explained how important it is to Italy, and in general just really made all of us in Serra feel that we were really doing very beneficial work for the church. Then we went to Rome, all on the same trip, because it tied in very neatly with the annual meeting with the dicastery for the clergy. So different people were here. One of the beautiful things that happens during that week when board members and others, if you're in Rome, can go, it's not kept reserved for board members because it's a Serra event. So the Serra Foundation makes a large and well-received contribution to the Pontifical North American College. And so every year that's made, and we have lunch with the seminarians and the rector. We usually either have mass or prayers, and we just meet and greet with all the seminarians, and then the presentation is made. So this year, Alex Duncan, who is a former president of Serra International and is currently on the Serra Foundation board, was in Rome. He came, and so were other board members here. You can probably recognize them from the photographs, and Alex made the basic donation to the college. This is the group at the entrance to the dicastery for the clergy, which is just across from St. Peter's. While we were, I don't know if it was before we went in or when we came out, but you can see Bob Campney in particular, Requiescat and Pace right there, and his wife Rose standing in the middle. It was a really interesting group. Joanne Bressoir's granddaughter and her boyfriend, fiance, came with us. It was lovely to have some young people there and who were so interested in everything that was going on. And I think the dicastery of the clergy were glad to see, well, we didn't say they were members, but I think they thought they were members. We just didn't disillusion them. One of the other things we did was there is a Canadian Pontifical College in Rome. And so I think many of you know that in Canada we have a separate foundation, but all doing Serra work. And so this year, our foundation decided to make a contribution to the Canadian College. So we went there with everybody the next day. And of course, Cardinal Collins, as you can see from the photograph, was in Rome for the synod, and so he was there as a kind of intermediary with the people at the college. And again, they welcomed us very diligently. They were very hospitable, and of course, they know all about Serra, especially its graduate students in the Canadian College there. And so when we went out later on for an evening meal with them, you can see how relaxed everybody was. It was really beautiful. John chose a really interesting restaurant, and it was good. You can see Cardinal Collins. We were just also able to relax and discuss. And I hope it's something that we can do from Canada in times to come. I'm looking at Matt directly here because he's very involved in the Serra Canada Foundation. Okay, so now I'm jumping to the rally in January in Miami. And I have this photograph of I better not say the three entities because it doesn't sound very complimentary. But there's Cindy, Anne, and myself. And then I noticed afterwards we're all wearing blue. And of course, that's in honor of Our Lady. You know, Mary, Mother of Vocations, pray for us. Right? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And this is a picture of that we visited the fairly newly established convent, and it's mixed both priests and religious sisters of the pierced twin hearts of Jesus and Mary. And that was really, we had a wonderful liturgy there, and they showed us around their premises, and they made a really excellent contribution, I think, to the tenor of that whole rally. It was really very, very good. In February, John and Matt and I went to Hong Kong. Francisca Lowe is a member of the Serra International Board and has been doing a lot of work. She works really hard on membership. And so she was able to arrange a meeting with Cardinal Stephen Chow of Hong Kong, as you can see in the picture. On the left is Deacon Thomas Wong, who is a former Serra International president, who a few years ago also was ordained to the Order of Deacons, and so he took part in the celebratory Mass. John has his, I was going to say his arm around, his hand on the shoulder of Elizabeth Cheng, who's the current president of the Serra Club in Hong Kong. There's Francisca, myself, Matt, and the priest is their current chaplain for Serra. So again, they made us very welcome. We had really interesting discussions with Cardinal Chow because of the tensions, let's say, politically in certain countries and in terms of religious freedom, religious presence. But they took us to, this is the seminary in Hong Kong, and I can't remember exactly how many students they have, but it's a goodly number. You can see the beautiful style of building, quite different from our seminaries, of course, but just so attractive and really very well attended. And used also for classes. I think they do have an undergraduate degree that they organise there as well. So despite what actually is going on politically, there does seem to be a pretty steady Catholic presence so far. And this is the group at Mass in the cathedral there in Hong Kong before they had their club meeting. And you can see it just looks like a Serra Club meeting. That's the beauty of Serra. I think any meetings I've ever attended, they all have the same structure. Very often they look very similar and sitting around tables. And I'm away in the corner doing a talk about what else? Serra's strategic plan. This was, I brought in this particular one because they invited us to a beautiful lunch in the China Club but also because just to show the different members who are there. The gentleman second from the back, actually, I think he's 90. He actually studied medicine at the University of Toronto. So he and I were able to exchange a few updatings and what goes on in that particular area, as well as being a long-time Serra. We were able to go to Macau. Again, Francisca organized that, and again, we were welcomed very warmly by the Serra Club in Macau, who again are fairly strong, considering any possible challenges that they're actually facing. And so we met with Bishop Stephen Lee, who again was very gracious, talked to us for a long time. He was wanting to know, as did the Cardinal in Hong Kong. Both of them needed to know more about Serra, even although they do have Serra clubs in their diocese. And I think, what I mentioned earlier about being aggregated to the congregation for the clergy, that's where something like that really impresses itself on maybe bishops who have not heard that much about Serra. And then they begin to really realize that we are the only lay apostolate that's actually aggregated to a Vatican congregation. So it's a signal honor, and I think we should play our hands sometimes too. I'm jumping to Australia because Matt and I came back from Hong Kong for 5 days and then flew to Australia. So, I heard grueling, it was. But it's for Serra, right? So, yeah, so it's just the way it works out. So we were, first of all, in Sydney, at a club in Sydney, and again, they made their club have a meeting They organised their meeting for a Saturday morning so that we could actually be present and meet the members and talk a little bit about Serra International, what's happening in other countries. And then they have this shrine at a beautiful church, Our Lady of the Seven Doors. So, he was just talking about that yesterday. And this is a blessed, because it's still not canonized, Charles Acutis. So it's always amazing to me to see a saint dressed like this. And we realize, the world is evolving, saints are current, and, everything is so very different. And people were coming in and out of that church to pray at this little shrine. We went to Melbourne, and so Anne Larkins, who was our VP of Communications, and John Scott, who's here, both from Australia, in the Melbourne Club, again welcomed us very warmly. And it just so happened that day they had their annual arranged meeting with the seminary in Melbourne. So we were able to attend the Mass there and then have lunch with the seminarians and the rector. And again, John did a beautiful talk about Serra in general and what was happening in Australia. And then I did a little talk after that about Serra International and some of the projects we have been involved in. I think that's a little bit out of focus, I apologize. But this Matt, I, and Anne, and 3 of the very young seminarians, I can't remember the exact number they have, but there's absolutely no doubt that no matter where we go, not just us, of course, the numbers are certainly, there's a trend, they're increasing and increasing. They certainly are in Toronto as well. And it's so very, very encouraging when you're in other places where vocations have been sort of down and now they're all rising. When I came back, or when we came back, it was time for the Toronto Ordinandi dinner. And this is one of the biggest things we do in Canada, so it counts globally, if you like, organised by Mario Biscardi, another former Serra International president, where we honour the seminarians of St. Augustine's Seminary in Toronto. And there's about, I think this year, 1,800 people in attendance. So when you're speaking to a room where you cannot see who are in the furthest corners, it's the strangest sensation, and the screens are massive, and I think maybe it loses something a little bit, but when the seminarians speak, there is silence. So the impact those young men have on a number like that is really telling, and I'm sure you recognize these faces. Regina is, in case somebody doesn't know, so So there's Mike Bragg, and there's Dan Grady, and there's Dennis Weber, all former presidents. Regina is the president of my current club in Ontario, in Halton. So she's another president. I tell her my president is Regina. This is a big jump, just again in terms of time. Jorge Fernandez of the Serra Club of Philadelphia started asking if somebody could go to Cuba, because he has an organization himself, apart from being president of Serra Club, where he takes, necessities, anything that is needed in Cuba. He has a group that collects items and ships items, and he goes down very often himself. He puts a lot of time and money and effort into this particular venture. And so he was able to organize a meeting. So John Liston, Jorge, and I went with Cardinal Gracias in Havana. And again, we talked for about an hour and a half about Serra. Now, the Cardinal knew a bit about Serra because a long time ago, there was a Serra club in Havana, but the regime didn't really allow for that for a long time. But now there is one being founded. And so I know this is jumping to lunch after the meeting with Cardinal Gracias, but the Cardinal had to go to other meetings, but he invited us for lunch in his house. And so this is us, and I'm playing Mother Surprise, with Jorge and the priest from Havana, who is going to be the chaplain of the club. So the Cardinal is just delighted to welcome Serra back, and Jorge's working very hard to establish this club in Havana. In his house, the Cardinal's residence, in the basement, there is a kindergarten, and it's a kindergarten obviously for young kids that's operated free of charge, run by the Archdiocese in Havana. And this just shows one or two kids, but there are many, many children and many, many volunteers. So it was just interesting to me that the spiritual and material, you might say, the helping aspects of being Catholic, of the Catholic Church, are brought together in a very obvious way. But more than that, I think that the fact that the Catholic Church is actually allowed to thrive in Cuba after years of repression has as much to do with what we in Serra do as well, that we are organized for the spiritual needs of people, but also for the practical needs of people. And I think in many ways, according to Jorge and the Cardinal, that has had a lot to do with making an impression on the regime in Cuba, that the Catholic Church is a very worthwhile venture. You wouldn't think that would have to be spelled out, but it sometimes does, So we were able to pay a visit to the nuncio in Havana, and this is just the entrance to his rather nice old house. And we met with him. He's from Malta originally himself. And, again, Jorge, we were explaining Serra. You can see the Serra folder. Now, he knew nothing much about Serra, the organization, but he did know about St. Junipero Serra. And so that was the entree, if you like, for us being able to talk about that with him. He was very receptive, especially when he heard that the Cardinal was willing to have a Serra club. They said several times, paso a paso, so step by step. You can't rush into a situation like this and just say, we'll do a Serra club tomorrow and you will be the president. No, that's what actually happened to me, but that's another story. But here, the real approach to establishing a club, you might say, but especially in the context. Context is everything, as usual. But I'm really hoping, we're all really hoping that this will be a success for many, many reasons. But also just because, the establishment of another religious group in Havana can only go towards achieving the kingdom, shall we say. Right. And this is a group of us, John, and the nuncio is holding the relic of St. Junipero Serra, because, as I said, it goes everywhere with us. I forgot to say, when we were in Melbourne, Anne and John also took us to another Serra club in a more country diocese, about 200 kilometres outside of Melbourne. And the Serra group there were just so active. We had Mass, the usual structure, we had Mass, and then we had the Serra meeting. They were wonderful people. Matt and I learned a lot from the people we were sitting at table with, and in terms of different approaches to life, but being united in Catholic faith and also in Serra. And Bishop Greg Bennett there, who had the Mass, we also talked with him. So he knew about Serra, and he took the St. Junipero's relic and went to every person in the congregation and blessed them with the relic individually. And it was just one of those striking moments that makes you think, wow, you know, Serra reaches all over, or could. We also visited the seminary, and I'm going to finish with this particular one because this was in April, I think, when we made this visit. And so the seminary, Jorge is here. We're talking to this young seminarian who's digitizing the library, but actually is a physician before he entered. And they have 4 physicians in the seminary, and we met with some of them right here. And again, that sort of concluded our international visits and all that sort of thing. But in Havana, in Cuba, the seminary is relatively new. It's newly built. Again, this idea of interaction, Catholic Church with the regime. And they have 24 seminarians. And, you know, in terms of the church in Cuba, this is actually, compared with other places, this is a very high proportion. So this is another aspect I think we learn about Serra, that all that we do, all the work we do, all our promotion of vocations, all our prayers for vocations, every aspect of our Serran work is showing fruit in so many parts of the world. And that concludes my talk for this particular case.